Welcome, everyone.
Je suis très heureux de pouvoir animer
I'm
ce webinaire
delighted
avec vous
to
pendant l'heure
facilitate
et demie
this
qui va
webinar
suivre
with you for the next hour and a
sur un
half
sujet tout à fait d'actualité, tout à fait excitant, je pense, d'autant
on
plus pour tous les gens
a very
qui se sont
relevant
connectés
topic.
en ce lundi matin. Donc, merci
I'd like to
à
thank you for
à tous d'être
connecting on a
d'être
Monday.
connectés. Merci
Thank you for
aux
being
intervenants
here. I'd also like to thank the
qui nous ont fait le
speakers
plaisir de nous rejoindre ce
that
matin, que je
graciously
vais présenter
accepted to join us
tout
this
à l'heure.
morning. I will be introducing the
Euh,
speakers in
donc,
just a few
ce webinaire
moments.
vous est proposé par deux
This
institutions, notamment
webinar
donc le
is
CRIMT et
presented by
l'OVIA.
two
Donc, le
institutions.
CRIMT, c'est le
CRIMT
Centre de
and
recherche
OVIA. CRIMT
interuniversitaire sur la
is
mondialisation et le travail.
the
Donc,
research
nous
center
sommes plusieurs
on
étudiants au doctorat et à la maîtrise qui font
globalization
partie du comité
and work.
étudiant, et
We are
on a
different
préparé et
students,
organisé
part of the student
ce
committee
webinaire
that
pour vous,
organized this webinar
notamment
for
avec
you.
Nicolas Roby qui
We
nous
co-organized
accompagne
this with
cette année.
Nicolas Roby,
Et
who
puis,
will
donc,
be
l'OVIA, qui est
supervising us this
l'Observatoire
year.
international
OVIA
sur les
is the
impacts
International
sociétaux de
Observatory
l'IA et du
on
numérique.
societal impacts of
Donc, plusieurs
AI
doctorants
and digital technologies. Different
font partie,
PhD students are
qui est un
part of
institut
the observatory.
montréalais. Et
This
donc,
observatory is based in Montreal.
avant de commencer, parmi les annonces que je voulais vous
For
faire,
some
c'est
housekeeping
bien sûr que donc,
instructions, I'd like to
ce webinaire
remind you that
est
this
bilingue, et donc
webinar
nos
will be
intervenants et
in
chaque
English and
personne
French.
dans l'audience est la
So
bienvenue
please feel free to
d'intervenir
speak in
dans la langue de
either
son
English or
choix ou le
French.
français. Et donc, nous avons ce matin la possibilité d'avoir
This
un service
morning, we will
d'interprétation
have
disponible.
simultaneous
Donc, pour
interpretation.
l'utiliser, vous pouvez
To
cliquer
use the
sur l'icône
simultaneous
en
interpretation
forme de
function,
globe en bas
click
de
on
l'écran
the
sur votre application
icon
Zoom. Et puis, vous pouvez
interpretation
choisir la langue de
button
votre
at the
choix.
bottom of your Zoom
Donc,
window, and then you
this
can select
workshop is
either French or
bilingual
English.
with a simultaneous interpretation, English to French or French to English. For those who require the interpretation service, simply click on the globe icon at the bottom of the Zoom screen and then choose the language of your choice. Voilà pour l'annonce. Et également,
That's it
je
for
voulais
my
vous
housekeeping
communiquer
instructions.
que ce
I
webinaire va
also
être
want to let
enregistré.
you know that this webinar will be
Donc,
recorded.
je pense que Nicolas va pouvoir commencer l'enregistrement dans quelques minutes.
Nicola will start the recording in just a few
N'hésitez
minutes.
pas à nous contacter si jamais vous
And
voulez
please
faire des
contact us
modifications ou
if you
voulez
would
ne
like
pas
to bring in
participer à
changes or
l'enregistrement.
if you would like
Voilà pour les annonces. Et
to not be
sans
recorded.
plus tarder, je vais commencer avec un petit mot
Without further ado,
d'introduction
I will
pour
start
contextualiser,
with a quick introduction.
pour
This will give
problématiser
you
notre
the
thématique du jour.
background
Et puis
of
ensuite, je
our
vous
webinar
présenterai le
today.
déroulement du
After I will
webinaire
explain
pendant l'heure et demie
how
qu'on a
the
ce
rest
matin.
of the webinar will
Donc,
unfold.
alors, le robot conversationnel ChatGPT de la société
The
californienne
conversation
OpenAI
robot
a connu une
ChatGPT
popularité remarquable depuis son
has
ouverture au grand public le 30
become very
novembre
popular since
2022.
its public
En
opening
seulement quelques
on
mois,
November
ce sont
30,
désormais des
2022. In a
dizaines
few
de millions
months,
d'utilisateurs qui interagissent
dozens of
quotidiennement
millions of
avec cette
users
intelligence
interact on
artificielle
a daily
génératrice de
basis with
texte
this
pour obtenir de l'aide
text-generating
sur une
AI
diversité de
to
tâches où
obtain
il est encore
support
difficile de
for
cerner
different tasks
l'étendue.
for which it is difficult
Certains
to
métiers ont
grasp
déjà
the
fortement
scope.
intégré cet outil dans leur activité
Some
quotidienne.
students
Je
have
pense au
integrated this
secteur
tool in
du
their
développement
daily
informatique, du
activities,
marketing,
such
par exemple.
as
Et
computer
certaines
science development
fonctionnalités
and
de
marketing,
ChatGPT
and
représentent déjà des
some
gains
functions
très
of
réels
ChatGPT
pour ces métiers.
represent
Alors, dans une interview du 18 mars
significant
2023
time
pour ABC
efficiencies.
News, donc Sam
For
Altman, qui est
ABC
donc
News,
le
Sam
directeur
Altman,
fondateur d'OpenAI, évoque l'outil
the founder
ChatGPT en
of
ces termes.
OpenAI,
Il
spoke
évoque
about ChatGPT. He
la
said
possibilité d'un apprentissage
that
personnalisé pour les
it's
étudiants.
possible to have
Il évoque la
custom
possibilité
teaching for students.
de ce
He
robot
also mentioned
d'utiliser
that
la
this
méthode
conversational
socratique
robot can use the
pour
Socratic
favoriser
method
l'apprentissage. Donc,
to support
qu'en
learning.
est-il réellement des potentiels et des
So,
répercussions de ce robot dans le monde
what
académique?
about the real
C'est
impacts
la
of
question
this AI in the
qu'on
academic
voudrait
realm?
poser
This
lors
is
de cette discussion,
a
puisque
question
la communauté
that we will
universitaire, donc
be
à la fois les
asking our
enseignants,
different
les chercheurs,
speakers.
les étudiants, ne sont pas épargnés par la popularité de ce robot et se
Faculty,
questionnent quant à
students,
l'attitude à
and
adopter face aux
other
usages
academic
potentiels de
workers
ChatGPT dans le milieu
do
académique.
not grasp all the
Il y a
impacts of
plusieurs
using
usages
ChatGPT
potentiellement
in the
avancés. Il y a
academic
l'aide à la
sector. There are
rédaction
different
de
uses, such
dissertations pour les
as
étudiants, l'aide à la création de questionnaires
dissertation
d'évaluation par les
writing,
enseignants,
also the
l'aide à la
creation of different quizzes
vulgarisation
for
de concepts ou de
professors,
notions dans le cadre d'une
also the
recherche, pour
simplification
ne citer que
of
quelques
some
exemples.
concepts
Donc,
and
en
research
effet, les
projects,
textes générés
among
par
other
ChatGPT sont le plus
possibilities.
souvent compréhensibles,
Texts
grammaticalement
generated by
corrects,
ChatGPT
cohérents, disponibles en plus
are
de 50
logical,
langues différentes.
grammatically correct,
On a envie de dire qui
available
n'a pas d'abord été
in
impressionné ou surpris
70
par les
languages or
capacités de
more.
ce robot. Et pourtant,
Many people are
ces outils
astonished
sont
by the
loin d'être
capacity of this
dépourvus de
robot.
failles et
However,
de
these
limites,
tools
parmi
have
lesquelles on
flaws
peut
and limits,
citer
among
l'absence de
which we
sources,
can
la
mention
diffusion de
the
fausses
absence of
informations,
sources,
la tendance à
the
une opinion
dissemination of
impulsuelle.
false
Alors,
information,
ChatGPT ne
non-consensual
serait-il
sharing
qu'un
of
simple
information.
porte-parole
Is
des idées les plus
ChatGPT just
répandues dans son
a
corpus
spokesperson
d'entraînement.
of
Il
the
s'agit bien
ideas
évidemment
that are
Internet.
found in the training
Et donc,
corpus,
il a
in
tendance à
other
baser
words,
ses réponses sur ce
Internet?
qu'il s'y trouve le plus
ChatGPT
probable sans
bases its
autre
answers
rapport
on what is
intrinsèque
the
à la
most
vérité,
likely
d'où le danger de
without
croire aux affirmations de
looking into what is
ChatGPT
true.
que l'outil
This is
vénère pourtant
why
avec aplomb et
the
assurance.
tool
Alors,
generates
opportunité
very
ou danger?
assertive
Comment accueillir
statements
ChatGPT dans le monde
without
présent?
knowing if
Voilà,
the
c'est ce
information is
thème bien
true.
d'actualité que nous vous proposons aujourd'hui de discuter ensemble.
We'd like to discuss
Au-delà du
this
cas de
theme together.
ChatGPT, c'est
Beyond the case
l'arrivée
of
des
ChatGPT,
intelligences artificielles
we'd like to talk about the
génératives de
arrival
texte
of
que
text
nous questionnons
generating
plus
AI
largement
that
dans
we are
cette
questioning more
discussion
broadly within
euh,
this discussion
au regard de ses répercussions et ses enjeux éthiques qui sont
in light
spécifiques
of
au
the
milieu
ethical
académique.
impacts that are specific
Donc,
to
le
the
format de la
academic
discussion ce
sector.
matin, on
This
vous
is how
propose
we
le principe
will be
d'une
discussing
table
the question
ronde
this morning.
avec des
We would like to
intervenants
use
que je vais
the
présenter
roundtable
dans un instant.
format
Nous
with
avons aussi prévu beaucoup de temps
some
pour
panelists
ouvrir
that
la
I will introduce
discussion
in a
avec
moment.
tous ceux et celles
We'd
qui
also
sont
like to
inscrits
open the
aujourd'hui.
discussion
Vous
with the
aurez l'occasion de prendre la
participants.
parole et de poser des
You'll have
questions.
the opportunity to
D'ailleurs,
ask questions and
c'était cher
share your
à mes yeux
comments.
de vous inviter à partager vos usages, vos découvertes,
We
vos
would also
inquiétudes
like you
à
to
propos de cet
share
outil.
your discoveries, your
Je
use,
pense
and
que
your
c'est sûr, il n'y a pas
concerns
de certitude sur les
about
répercussions de cet outil dans le
AI
monde
tools.
académique. Et donc, il s'agit d'animer une discussion dans un esprit
We'd
de
like to
bienveillance, de
have
curiosité,
an open
de respect pour
and
les
caring
opinions de chacun,
conversation.
évidemment.
We'd like to make sure
C'est un
that it's
sujet
a
qui fait l'objet de
respectful
controverses, on le
conversation,
sait. Il y a
respecting
des
the different point
enseignants
of
qui
views. There's a lot
décident
of
d'interdire cet
controversy.
outil, ou
Some professors
des programmes
want to
pédagogiques
ban
qui
the use
décident
of the
de
tool,
l'interdire ou au
and
contraire de l'intégrer
some
totalement.
learning
Et donc,
programs
c'est
choose to either
dans cet
ban
esprit
or
de
integrate
bienveillance qu'on voudrait
this
animer
tool.
cette discussion pour
We'd like to
se situer
have
par rapport
a
à
respectful
l'usage de cet
conversation
outil. Et
to
donc,
learn more
sans
about
attendre, je vais vous
this
présenter
tool.
notre
Without
panel
further ado, I'd
d'intervenants
like to introduce our
que je suis
panelists.
vraiment très heureux de les avoir ce matin et
I'm
qu'ils acceptent
delighted
d'être avec
to
nous.
welcome them this morning.
Je les remercie infiniment pour
I'd
ça.
like to
Et
thank them
puis,
for accepting the
donc, je vais
invitation.
peut-être commencer par présenter
Let me
Jérémy
begin by
Pinto.
presenting
Donc,
Jeremy Pinto.
Jérémy, bonjour, tu es
Good morning,
scientifique en
Jeremy.
recherche appliquée senior
Applied
dans
research
l'équipe de
scientist
recherche appliquée du MILA, donc qui est
in
aussi
the
l'Institut
MILA
québécois
research
d'intelligence
team,
artificielle. Donc, bonjour
the
Jérémy.
Quebec Institute on Artificial Intelligence. Good morning, Jeremy.
Ensuite, nous avons également la présence
We
de Kai Hung.
are with
Donc, bonjour
Kyle
Kai,
Jung.
tu es doctorant à
Good morning,
HEC Montréal
PhD student
et
at
tu
HEC
mènes des
Montreal.
recherches sur les pratiques des
His research
données, les
focuses
travailleurs
on
qui
data
développent
practices,
l'IA, à la fois au Canada
on
et en
workers that
Inde.
develop
Tu es aussi membre
AI in
du
Canada and
comité de
India.
l'OVIA.
You're also part of
Merci Kai
the
pour ta présence.
OVIAC committee. Thank you, Kyle, for
Également, je
being here.
vais vous
I'd
présenter
also like to introduce
Pamela Lirio.
Pamela Lirio.
Pamela, tu es professeur agrégé à
Pamela
l'école des relations
is professor
industrielles,
at the
également
Industrial Relations
co-chercheuse au
School,
CRINT, à
also
l'OVIA, et
co-researcher
puis
at CRINT and Novia.
engagée depuis longtemps pour l'IA éthique et responsable.
You've been
Donc,
engaged
merci
for responsible and
pour ta présence
ethical
aujourd'hui.
AI. Thank you for
Et
being
puis
here with
enfin, je
us.
vois
And
que Raja
last but
nous a
not
déjà
least,
rejoint, c'est très bien.
Raja is with us.
Bonjour Raja.
Good
Tu
morning,
es
Raja.
professeur émérite en
Raja
IA
is
à Sorbonne
Emerita Professor
Université,
in AI
également professeur
from
en éthique des
Sorbonne
technologies.
University,
Et
also
tu travailles
professor
depuis
in
longtemps aussi sur
technology. You've been
l'engagement dans les
working
réflexions éthiques à
on
propos de l'IA.
ethical
Et
questions about
on
AI.
est très heureux de t'avoir ce matin pour cette
We're
discussion qui
also
s'annonce
very
passionnante.
happy to have you
Donc,
this
je
morning
voudrais vraiment,
on
encore une
this
fois,
very
remercier
interesting
tous les quatre intervenants.
discussion. I'd like to thank
Et puis,
the four
pour
panelists.
vous présenter rapidement le déroulement du webinaire, donc
Here
on va
is how
d'abord commencer
the webinar will be organized.
on voulait vous présenter d'abord les fonctionnalités techniques, en fait, le
I would like
fonctionnement
to
technique de ChatGPT
explain
pour poser la
the
discussion sur des bases
technical functioning of ChatGPT
scientifiques, en fait.
so we
Et
can
puis,
have
avoir
a
peut-être
science-based
mettre un
discussion.
peu de vulgarisation,
Perhaps
profiter
we
de
can
10
also
minutes pour
try
mettre tout le monde au
to
même niveau dans la discussion.
simplify
Donc, en
the
fait, c'est
technology in
Jérémy
itself.
Pinto qui a
Jeremy
voulu
Pinto
nous préparer une présentation
who
de 10 minutes. Donc,
prepared a 10-minute
on va commencer
presentation
par celle-ci. Et puis, à la suite
on
de cette présentation,
the
on va
fundamentals
commencer à
of
proprement parler la table
ChatGPT.
ronde
Then
qui va
we will
alterner des
proceed with a
moments
roundtable
aux
discussion.
intervenants pour leur permettre de s'exprimer sur des questions qu'on a
Our
préparées.
panelists
Et puis des
will
périodes de
answer some prepared
questions-réponses
questions, and then we'll
avec tous
have
ceux
a
qui sont
Q&A
connectés ce
session with
matin.
the audience.
Et puis, vous pourrez poser vos questions aux intervenants ou
Please feel
partager
free
des
to ask your
réflexions.
questions to the
Donc,
panelists, or you can share
n'hésitez
your own
surtout pas pour ça.
reflections, share your
Donc,
insight.
on va
Please feel
structurer
free.
les échanges de la table ronde en deux
We will
thématiques.
structure our
Il y a
discussion
une
in
première
the roundtable
partie qui
under two
va
themes. The
nous
first
occuper
part,
pendant 30-40 minutes, qui va être celle plutôt des
which will take
opportunités et
30 to
des
40 minutes,
usages
we'll
de
look at the
ChatGPT.
opportunities and the
Et puis, une deuxième
different usages
partie
of
qui
ChatGPT.
sera plus
And the
orientée
second
questionnement
part
des limites et
will
des
be
dangers.
focused on
Et
the
je vous
limits and
présenterai au moment de la
the
table ronde, donc juste après la
dangers
présentation
of
de Jérémy,
ChatGPT.
les questions en fait qu'on a envoyées
I will
en
display
document
the
à
questions
nos
that we sent
intervenants pour
2
leur
weeks ago
permettre de
to our
préparer
panelists so they can
leur
prepare some answers.
intervention, mais qui sont résumées sur ces deux thèmes. Donc voilà, je ne prends pas plus de temps pour cette
So that's it for
introduction.
my part.
Et puis, je pense qu'on a hâte d'entendre Jérémy
And
sur
we're looking
donc,
forward to
le fonctionnement de
hear
ChatGPT.
Jeremy on
Et
how
donc, Jérémy, si tu
ChatGPT
es
works.
prêt, si tu le veux bien, je te passe la parole.
If you're ready, I would like to hand it over to you, Jeremy.
Merci beaucoup, Romain.
Thank
Déjà
you very
pour,
much,
pour
Romain.
l'introduction et de
Thank you for the
m'inviter aujourd'hui.
introduction.
Alors,
Thank
je
you
vais
for the
juste
invitation.
partager mon écran.
Bear with me as I share my
Donc,
slides.
je pense que vous devriez tous être en mesure de voir
You
mon
should
écran. Juste me
be able to see
confirmer, Romain,
my
si vous
screen.
voyez bel et bien
Can
mon
you
écran.
please confirm if you can see
Je
my
vois bien
slides?
ton écran, tout va bien pour moi.
Parfait.
Confirm that I could see your
Donc,
screen.
allons-y. Donc, bonjour tout le monde.
Good
Merci d'être
morning.
là ce matin.
Thank
Mon
you
nom
for
est
being
Jérémy.
here.
Je
My name
suis
is
chercheur
Jeremy.
appliqué au
I'm
MILA.
applied researcher at
Si
MILA.
jamais vous voulez me contacter suite
If
à
you'd like
cette
to contact me
présentation-là, n'hésitez pas
after
sur
this
les réseaux sociaux,
presentation,
par email, etc.
here are my
Donc, le but d'aujourd'hui, c'est
different
vraiment un peu de partir cette
handles
discussion.
and my
Comme
email
si bien
address.
Romain, pour être tous à peu près sur un même pied
So we
d'égalité
thought it would be
sur
good
comprendre le
to have
fonctionnement,
this
démystifier un peu ce
general
qu'est ce
presentation so
ChatGPT.
you could better
Donc,
understand
pour
ChatGPT.
commencer,
This
une
presentation
petite
is titled
démonstration.
Demystifying
Je pense que
ChatGPT.
tout le monde,
Here's a
à
quick
peu près
demo.
rendu là, surtout si vous êtes connecté aujourd'hui, vous avez soit déjà entendu parler,
You've
soit
probably
déjà
already
certainement
heard about
interagi aussi
ChatGPT.
avec
Maybe you've
ChatGPT.
tried
Ça vaut quand même la
to
peine
work
de
with
faire une petite
ChatGPT,
démonstration. Donc
but it's
ici,
worth to give you a
je
quick
pose une question
demonstration.
à ChatGPT.
Here,
Et
I
il
ask
dit
a question
simplement,
to
je m'apprête à
ChatGPT.
donner une présentation sur
I'm
ChatGPT,
about
le modèle de langue
to share a
OpenAI.
presentation on
Explique ce qu'est
ChatGPT,
ChatGPT de sorte à ce que
the
ma
language model of
et garde
OpenAI.
l'explication courte.
Can you
Et
explain
ça, c'est une réponse.
how ChatGPT works
J'ai fait aucun
to my
edit, c'est
grandmother?
vraiment la réponse
Keep
directe
it short.
de ChatGPT en français.
This
D'ailleurs,
is
tout cet
the
échange-là a été fait en
answer of
français.
ChatGPT in French,
qui me
no
répond,
editing.
bonjour,
ChatGPT
est un
answers,
ordinateur très
hello,
intelligent qui
ChatGPT
peut
is a
répondre à
very
des
smart
questions et
computer
parler
that
comme
can
un humain.
answer questions and can
Imagine
speak like a
qu'on peut
human
poser
being.
n'importe quelle
Imagine that you
question
can
et même
ask
vous aimez
any
bien ça. C'est un
question.
peu comme avoir une bibliothèque géante dans ta poche. Ça, on pourra en débattre un peu
It's
aujourd'hui.
almost like
Mais ça
having
donne
a
quand même une belle
giant
réponse
library
courte,
within
et
your
aussi
pocket.
qui est facile à
You see, it
expliquer.
generated a
Donc,
short
pour ceux et
answer,
celles qui
easy to explain
n'ont
to anyone.
jamais interagi avec ChatGPT dans le
For those
passé,
who have
on
never
pose des
interacted
questions
with
par texte via
ChatGPT, you
chat
can
et
ask
ChatGPT nous
text
répond
messages,
avec
and ChatGPT
une des
will
réponses les plus probables.
answer with one of the most likely
Maintenant, je
answers.
veux essayer de démystifier un peu comment
Now let me
ChatGPT fonctionne, mais
demystify
avant tout,
how this
pourquoi est-ce que
works.
ça se nomme
But first of all,
ChatGPT?
why is it called
Donc, tout d'abord,
ChatGPT
c'est
in the first
une
place?
compagnie basée à San
First of
Francisco,
all,
donc c'est vraiment plus en
OpenAI
anglais.
is based in San
Tout d'abord,
Francisco,
Chat,
so it's
ce modèle a été
based in English.
conçu
First of all,
pour
Chat.
interagir
This
via
model
un
was
par chat. Et
designed
c'est ça,
to
d'après moi,
work
qui a
through a
rendu ce modèle si
chat.
viral, c'est qu'on n'a pas
And
besoin
that's
d'une
what
certaine
made this model
connaissance
so
en IA
viral.
pour
You
pouvoir
don't
s'en
have to
servir.
have
N'importe qui peut juste
AI
se connecter, se brancher et commencer à
information.
parler.
Anybody
Donc
can
ça, c'est un peu
connect to
ce qu'il y a
ChatGPT
pourquoi on
and
appelle ça
start chatting.
ChatGPT, c'est qu'on peut
The
clavarder
reason why it's
avec
called
ce
chat is because
modèle-là.
you can chat with
Ensuite, il y a
this
le
AI
GPT, c'est un
model.
acronyme.
Then
Donc, c'est
GPT
un
is an acronym.
anglophone pour
It's an
Generative
English
Pre-trained
acronym for
Transformer. En français, ce serait
Generative Pre-trained
Transformer,
Transformer.
génératif
You can
pré-entraîné.
see the French
Donc,
translation
les
under.
GPT, de manière générale, c'est un type de modèle proposé par OpenAI.
GPTs
Ça fait déjà il y a quelques
are
années.
different
Et
models
ces modèles-là
proposed
peuvent
by
générer du texte
OpenAI,
à
and
partir
they
de
can
rien.
generate
Donc,
text
décomposons chaque mot
out of
un par
nothing.
un. Premièrement, generative,
can
génératif.
let's
Ça, un
look
modèle
at
génératif,
different
c'est un modèle qui
the
va être
different words of
utilisé
GPT.
pour
Generative
générer
is a
du
model that
contenu
can be
à
used to
partir de plus ou moins rien.
generate
Étant
content
donné n'importe quelle requête,
from
il peut
more or less
simplement
anything.
imaginer
From
compléter
any
le reste.
request,
Donc, par exemple,
the
avec
generative
GPT, ce
model
qu'on veut,
can
c'est qu'on
complete the
complète
rest.
le
With
texte.
the
Mais il y a toutes
ChatGPT, the
sortes d'autres
text is
modèles
completed, but
génératifs.
there are
On a des
other
modèles qui
generative
peuvent générer des
models.
images,
Some
des
can
modèles qui
generate
peuvent générer
images,
des sons, de
some
la
can
voix.
generate sounds,
Dans
voice.
le cas de GPT, c'est vraiment
For GPT,
limité au texte.
it's limited to
Ensuite,
text
on a
generation.
le pre-trained, donc
Then there's
pré-entraîné. Ça,
pre-trained
c'est ce qui veut
in
dire que ces modèles
GPT.
ont été vraiment
Pre-trained means that the
pré-entraînés sur
models were
l'ensemble du texte
pre-trained
qu'on retrouve sur
on
Internet. Donc,
all
pensez
of
plus
the
ou moins à
text
tout
you
le
can
contenu
find
accessible sur
online.
Internet,
Think about
plus
all
ou
the
moins certaines
content
sources de
accessible
données
online.
dont on ne
Almost
sait pas
all
nécessairement.
sorts of
C'est
data.
OpenAI qui décide un peu
We don't
c'est
know
quelle
in a
sorte de
study which one.
information. Et
OpenAI
de manière
will
générale,
choose which
quand on parle
ones
d'un
are
modèle qui a
provided
été
through the
entraîné
training.
sur énormément de données, c'est là où on
And
parle en fait
if it's
de
a model that was trained on a lot of
un autre acronyme que vous avez
data,
déjà entendu
it's
dans
large
les médias
language
ou dans la
models,
littérature.
LLM. Maybe
LLM,
you've
c'est
heard
Large
this through
Language Models.
the
Donc,
media
en français, on dit des
or
grands modèles
the literature.
Et quand on dit large, c'est juste très, très
Large
gros. Il n'y a pas
and
vraiment une
large language
définition
models is
exacte
very
du terme,
broad.
mais
There's
c'est
no
très gros
exact
par rapport
definition
à
of the
ce dont on
term,
a
but
l'habitude.
it's very big compared
Finalement,
to what we
transformer.
think of
Donc
usually.
ça, c'est une
Transformer,
architecture très
now in
spécifique de
GPT.
réseaux
This is a
neuronaux. On
specific
va pas rentrer dans ce que
architecture
font
of
exactement les réseaux neuronaux. Mais juste
neural
sachez que les
networks.
transformers, en fait, ça a été proposé pour la première
Transformers
fois en
were
2017
suggested the
par
first time in 2017
Google à
by
NeurIPS, donc, qui
Google
est une
in Europe,
conférence très prestigieuse
a
en
high-level
IA.
conference
Mais une des
in AI.
particularités, en fait, la
One
particularité la plus
specific
impressionnante
element
des
of
transformers,
a
c'est qu'ils
transformer
permettent
is
d'entraîner
the
de manière
fact that
efficace
they
des
can
modèles qui
allow
sont
efficient
énormes sur
training
un ensemble de
of
données énorme.
large
Avant
models
ces
on
modèles-là, quand
large
on voulait vraiment
sets of
augmenter la
data.
taille de nos réseaux de neurones, il y avait toute une complexité et il fallait
Before
faire toutes sortes de
having this
manipulations. Avec les
specific
transformers, il s'avère
architecture,
que tu
there had
juste
to
augmenter
be
le
all
nombre de
sorts of
paramètres,
manipulations.
augmenter la
Now,
taille de
just by
données,
increasing the
devenait meilleur
parameters and the
résultat.
size
Et donc ça,
of
c'est
data,
depuis à peu près 2017 que plus ou moins
since
la
2017,
grande majorité en fait des
the
architectures,
majority
surtout en
of
texte, se
architectures,
basent
especially
sur des
text
transformers.
architectures, are based on transformers.
Donc, revenons un peu à GPT.
Coming back
Ici,
to
je prends une
GPT,
phrase qui a été extraite vraiment d'un article de OpenAI,
his phrase was
quand ils ont
taken from
publié
OpenAI
GPT-2. Ils
when
disent
they
GPT est entraîné avec
launched
un objectif
GPT-2.
simple.
GPT-2 is
Choisir le
trained
mot
with the simple
suivant,
objective.
compte tenu de tous les mots
Predict the
précédents
following
dans un
word
texte donné.
given the
Donc, si on décortique cette
previous
phrase un
words
peu,
in a
en fait,
given
tout ce qu'on
text.
essaie de dire ici, c'est qu'à la base,
In other words,
GPT est un énorme perroquet
GPT
mécanique. Tout ce qu'il
is
fait,
a
c'est qu'il prédit le
large
prochain mot.
mechanical parrot. It just
Donc, comment est-ce
predicts
que ça
the
fonctionne?
following word.
Prenez
This is
par
how it
exemple
works.
cette phrase sur
Let's
le site
take,
du
for
Mila. Donc,
instance,
vous pouvez aller
the
naviguer
sentence
sur le
on
site
the
du
Mila
Mila,
website.
Mila.Québec. Si vous
You
allez dans
can
la
find
section
this
à
on
propos
Mila
du Mila,
Quebec.
vous allez
If you
retrouver
look
cette
in
phrase.
the
Fondé
About
par le
Mila, you can
professeur
find this.
Yoshua
Founded
Bengio,
by
Mila
Professor
aujourd'hui
Yoshua
le plus
Bengio.
est aujourd'hui le plus
Mila
grand centre de recherche
is the
universitaire
largest
en apprentissage
academic
profond au
research
monde. Donc,
center
un texte
in
qui est public
machine
sur Internet.
learning or deep learning
OpenAI peut donc
in the
aller
world.
chercher ce texte,
So
puis
OpenAI
entraîner ce
can
perroquet mécanique géant à l'aide de ce
get
texte.
this
Comment
text
est-ce que
and
ça
train
fonctionne?
the parrot
On
with
va
the
tout
text.
d'abord masquer un mot de la
So
phrase.
first of all, you
Par exemple,
can
le dernier
hide
mot
a
de la
word
phrase.
in the sentence, the
On va
last word of
ensuite
the
demander
sentence
au
in this case,
perroquet
and then you'll
mécanique
ask
géant de
the
compléter la phrase.
giant
Donc,
mechanical
on
parrot
lui
to
montre
complete
tout le texte avant ce
the
mot
sentence.
qui
So
manque,
you
et
show
on
the
lui
text
demande
before
quel
the
est
missing
le mot
word,
manquant le
and you
plus
ask the
probable.
parrot,
Et
what
là,
is
le
the most
perroquet va
likely
répondre
missing word?
monde,
And then
Canada. Au début, lors
world,
de son
Canada.
entraînement, il va répondre des mots qui
The
n'ont pas
beginning of the
rapport.
training,
Mais plus on l'entraîne
we'll
sur du texte,
start
plus le perroquet
answering
commence à
some odd
comprendre en fait
answers,
quels sont les
but
mots les
the
plus
more
probables étant
the
donné le
system is
contexte.
trained, it will
Et donc, c'est
determine
vraiment
what is the
ça,
most
des modèles
likely
comme
word given the
GPT. Ce qu'ils
context.
font, c'est prédire le
And
prochain
this
mot.
is what
Il s'avère
models
que de
like
juste prédire
ChatGPT
le
do. They
prochain
try to
mot
predict the next word
donne en fait une certaine
by
capacité à
predicting
ces
the next word
modèles-là
that provides
qu'on
a
peine toujours à
capacity
comprendre.
to these models
Pourquoi?
that we
Pourquoi
still
est-ce que ça
try
fonctionne
to
aussi bien?
understand.
On ne
Why
sait
does it
pas,
work
mais
so
ça fonctionne
efficiently?
très
We don't
bien,
know.
surtout quand ces
But it
modèles
works
sont de
very
plus
well,
en plus
especially
éminents
when
et
these
quand on leur donne
models
plus de
are
textes sur lesquels
larger
entraîner.
and we give them more text
Donc, si on fait
to
ça
train
sans
on.
cesse sur l'ensemble de l'Internet,
So if we do
quel
this
entraînement
with
GPT
all of
finit par
internet,
apprendre à
GPT
compléter n'importe quelle
can
phrase,
learn to
et ce,
complete
de
any
manière
sentence
réaliste, avec une
in a
certaine
realistic way
syntaxe, une grammaire, une cohérence.
with
Donc ici, je vais repris la même
syntax
phrase,
and
j'ai coupé
logic.
le dernier mot. Et ce que je
Here,
fais, c'est que je demande à GPT
I
de
remove the
compléter le
last
reste
word
de
and
la
I
phrase. Et
ask
là, vous voyez,
ChatGPT to
plutôt que de
complete the
compléter au
end of the
monde, il
sentence.
complète au Canada. Ce qui est un
Rather than
perroquet
saying in the
très
world,
élève.
it's
C'est un
that in
perroquet
Canada.
approximatif. Le
It's an
Canada,
approximate parrot,
c'est quand même
Canada,
vrai. Le
is
sens de la
still
phrase,
true.
même au
The
Canada,
meaning
versus même.
of the sentence is still true if you say Canada and you don't say the world. But then it continued with the text, and this text is not on the Mila website. Through different sources that GPT found, was able to add additional text and a coherent text with an interdisciplinary lab that brings together researchers and students from the University of Montreal, McGill, and Polytechnic.
Représente en fait ce qu'est le Mila. Et on peut même continuer.
And this is pretty logical. Researchers look at different research projects on artificial learning. So this shows you how
Un grand perroquet mécanique
a model like this
tel que dit
works.
Sam Altman sur Twitter
As
il y a quelques mois. Donc,
Sam Altman said on Twitter,
Sam Altman, le CEO de OpenAI et un des
CEO
cofondateurs.
of OpenAI, one of the co-founders, he said it could be a giant mechanical parrot,
Donc, au final,
but maybe
si
we
ce
are
perroquet
also
mécanique
parrots.
fait que répéter des mots, mais d'une
So if this
manière
parrot only just
cohérente,
repeats
d'une manière
words
convaincante,
in a
manière.
logic way
Et
and a
est-ce que
convincing
ça
way,
pourrait
like a
possiblement
human
dire que
being,
les humains sont juste
does that
des
mean
gros
that
perroquets mécaniques
human
au bout du
beings are
chose
mechanical
à débattre,
parrots
bien
after
sûr.
all?
Mais tout ça
It's a
pour un peu
debatable
ouvrir cette
question.
discussion-là, que c'est pas pour dire que juste parce que c'est un gros perroquet qui
It's
fait
not
que
because
répéter
it's a
le plus
giant parrot
probable,
that
que ça n'a pas
repeats the most likely
nécessairement
word,
d'énormes valeurs
that it
d'un
doesn't
point de
have
vue
a
scientifique,
tremendous
d'un point de
scientific
vue
value
créatif,
or creative
et
value,
d'un point de vue pratique dans nos vies de tous les
even
jours.
a practical
Donc,
day-to-day value.
GPT versus ChatGPT, il y a quelques nuances
GPT
quand même.
versus
Là, jusqu'à
ChatGPT.
date, je vous ai présenté
There are
surtout
some
GPT,
nuances. I
mais
presented
ChatGPT, c'est
mostly
vraiment ce qui a un peu
GPT,
bouleversé le
but
monde.
ChatGPT really disrupted the
mis le
world.
spotlight sur cette
It
technologie
really
de
put the
GPT qui
spotlight
existait
on the
depuis quand même
GPT
quelques
technology
années.
that
Donc,
has
la grosse
existed for a
différence
few
entre
years.
GPT
The
et
major difference
ChatGPT,
between
c'est que
GPT and ChatGPT,
pour entraîner en fait ce ChatGPT, ce qui a
to
été fait, c'est
train
qu'OpenAI a
the
engagé une
GPT,
sorte d'armée
OpenAI
de personnes
hired
pour leur demander
an
d'évaluer
army
les capacités du modèle.
of
Non seulement
people to
d'évaluer les
assess the
capacités du
model's
modèle, mais
capacity,
aussi
not
de
only to
donner certains
assess
exemples
the
à
model's
comment
capacity, but
répondre.
also to
Vous
provide
avez
examples
certainement
on how
remarqué
to
que
answer.
ChatGPT a une sorte
You've
de
probably
style.
noticed that ChatGPT has its
ChatGPT
own
va souvent
style.
dire, as a
ChatGPT will
large
often
AI
say,
language model, I cannot.
as a large
Ça va avoir
language model, I
certaines lignes de
cannot,
phrases
or
que,
it will
si on
have
s'en sert, on
some
commence à les
specific
reconnaître.
phrasing. And
Et ça, c'est
once
grâce au
you
fait, en fait, j'ai été là
use
là-dessus,
ChatGPT a lot, you'll
c'est
start
que
recognizing
on a
these
ramassé toutes
patterns.
sortes d'exemples de vrais dialogues
There were
avec des
all
personnes
sorts of
telles qu'on se
examples of
prendrait
real
à parler
dialogue with
avec un
people
humain.
that
Et on a pris un
were
modèle
chatting with
GPT
the
qui a été
human being,
préentraîné
and
sur
then we
l'ensemble d'Internet
used
et
a
on l'a
GPT model that was
affiné,
trained on
fine-tuné,
internet
comme
and
on
was
dit en anglais,
fine-tuned
sur cet ensemble d'exemples par la suite pour
with these
donner
different
naissance
examples
à ce modèle ChatGPT tel qu'on le
to
connaît. Et cette méthode-là, ça a été
give birth to
baptisée
ChatGPT. And this
reinforcement
method
learning
was
from human
coined
feedback. Donc, ça veut dire,
reinforced
cette
learning
technique,
from
c'est juste qu'on a
human
appris à
feedback,
partir de
or
rétroactions humaines
RLHF,
comment entraîner ces modèles-là à répondre tel qu'un humain le ferait.
to answer like a
Finalement,
human
les
being would do.
capacités, on en entend tous parler. Ici,
And
je vous montre
capacities now.
certains titres de journaux. Donc, ChatGPT passe les
ChatGPT
examens de barreau, passe
passes
les examens
the
de médecine,
law and bar
réussit à
association
passer
exams. ChatGPT
les
passes a
entrevues
major
pour
medical exam,
devenir
but
ingénieur
just barely.
logiciel. Donc,
ChatGPT
toutes
passes
sortes
Google
de
coding
capacités
interview
qui
for level
sont
3
vraiment
engineer
impressionnantes et
with
auxquelles on ne s'attendait vraiment pas d'un simple perroquet mécanique.
183K salary. All these
Donc
things
voilà,
that
ça
wouldn't be
résume un peu
expected
le fonctionnement de
for
ChatGPT et
a
donc tout ce qui
mechanical
est
parrot.
toutes les autres
That's
questions
it
aux
for
alentours
the
par rapport à ce panel
basics of
d'aujourd'hui. Ça,
ChatGPT.
je laisse pour la suite.
And I
Mais
can
je vous
answer
remercie
all your
énormément de votre temps.
questions during the discussion. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, Jérémy.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Pour cette présentation passionnante. Oui,
Thank you
effectivement, les
for a very
questions, je pense qu'on va
interesting
pouvoir les
presentation.
concentrer dans la partie questions-réponses.
We'll keep the questions
juste
for
après
the Q&A session
thématique
right
de la
after
table ronde. En tout
the
cas,
first theme of our roundtable discussion. Thank you for breaking down the acronym, for giving us a quick overview of artificial intelligence
on a bien entendu
fundamentals.
Je décide de tout ce qu'ils font, c'est prédire le prochain mot. Effectivement, il y a une
I took away that
sans doute
these
utiliser
GPTs will
ses
predict
propres
the
intrinsèques
next
à ce
word.
type.
There are things that are introduced to this type of model.
À la fois sur les
We will be
opportunités et
able
les dangers
to
ou les
discuss
Donc,
all these
je
different
vais
elements
lancer
on our
tout de suite,
discussion on the
le principe de la
opportunities
table
and the
ronde.
limits.
Et pour le lancer, donc, je vais vous parler d'abord des deux
To kick off
thématiques,
this
des deux
roundtable
questions
conversation, I'd like to
qu'on a
show you the
prévues
two questions that
qu'on a envoyées
we submitted
aux
to our panelists
pour animer et préparer leur intervention.
so
Donc,
that they could
pendant une
prepare
première partie,
their
environ 40 minutes,
interventions.
on va discuter
For
ensemble
the next 40
du
minutes,
thème
we
des
will be
opportunités et des
discussing
usages.
the
Et donc, cette
opportunity and
première
different
question,
usages.
c'était quelles opportunités
First question,
les intelligences artificielles génératives, telles que ChatGPT,
what opportunities
offrent-elles au monde
as
universitaire?
generative
Sont-elles de bons
models
assistants de
can offer
recherche
to
ou
the
d'enseignement?
academic world?
Et si oui,
Could they
en
be
quoi?
good teaching
Je vais
and
poser cette
learning
question en anglais
tools?
également.
If so,
Donc,
what?
what
I'll repeat the
opportunities
question
do
in English.
generative AI, such as ChatGPT, offer to the academic world? Do they make good research or teaching assistance? And if so, how? Donc, je peux vous présenter également la deuxième question.
Let me also share with you the
Le
second
thème
question
des limites, inquiétudes, dangers.
on the
Donc, cette
limits, the
deuxième question
concerns, and
était
dangers.
formulée ainsi. Dans
This
le
is how the
même
question
temps,
was
l'utilisation de
asked.
ChatGPT dans le monde académique soulève d'importantes inquiétudes.
The use of
Quels
ChatGPT in
sont,
the
selon vous, les
academic sector
principaux
raises some
dangers de
concerns.
l'utilisation
What are
des
the
IA
main
génératives
dangers of
dans
using
l'enseignement et
generative
la
AI
recherche universitaire?
in
Comment les
academic teaching and
éviter?
learning?
Comment
How to
l'encadrer?
avoid some dangers and how to provide more support.
At the same time, there are significant concerns about the use of ChatGPT in the academic world. What do you see as the main dangers of using generative AI in academic teaching and research? How to avoid them? How can it be framed or regulated? Et donc, cette deuxième question sera présentée par Angélique Rouvière, à qui je donnerai la parole du coup, au moment d'animer la deuxième thématique.
Who will be
Donc,
moderating
sans plus tarder,
the second theme.
revenons donc à cette première thématique. Donc,
Let's come back to the first question about the opportunities of generative AI for the academic sector. Are they good research or teaching assistants? If so, what?
Sur cette réponse à Kai.
I will hand it over to Kai.
C'est à toi. Je te propose
over to you.
Pour nous donner ton avis sur cette première thématique.
Please share with us your insight on the first theme.
Oui, merci. Merci. Je suis Kai et
thank you very much. My name is Kai.
Wait, one sec. I need to change the. Oui, je vais présenter en anglais. If you want to change your interpretation, that would be great. I'm gonna. I just have a short 3 like slides to share with you all, so bear with me. Yeah. No, let me just see. Let me set myself up. So, yeah. Thank you very much. I'm Kai. I'm currently doing my PhD at HSM Montreal in Human Resources and Organizational Behavior, and I'm doing a lot of work around the data practices and the workers in the data value chain of the production of AI and its development. So all of my background was on the future of work, and back in December of last year, I was approached to do a report on the future of work and the future of learning. And then and then this is part of a longer history of different labs that I have been leading and also involved in on AI and in the workplace. So for this report that we were doing, I essentially did a literature review of all the top journals in computing and in education, right? So it is in that particular intersection, but also I wanted to give 3 cases very quickly on how ChatGPT can be beneficial. And then that are based on my own experiences of interacting with it, but also how it has benefited me. And then potentially this can be for food for thought as we think about this. So this is about the practices of how work could actually change, but it's also thinking through some of the larger questions as well in part 1 of this, but also afterwards about its risks and how do we do this responsibility. So as some of you guys might know, last week I defended my doctoral proposal, so I was quite busy. And then simultaneously, I was trying to finish this report, which I'll share the link to after. And then because I was doing my proposal, I was also, this report was a bit delayed by a week or so. And then the person that I was reporting to actually wrote in an email to me saying, hey, this is what ChatGPT says about the type of items that we should cover in the report that I'm doing. And then this is a way of kind of saying, the type of interaction that workers and also like potentially researchers in academia might confront. So the prompt was, how can artificial intelligence be used in the design and development of learning materials and courses? Very relevant. And then, so we give 5 different kind of bullet points. It says like personalized learning, intelligent tutoring system, natural language processing, content curation, and predictive analytics. I'm not going to go through them each, but what was helpful was it did help if you don't know a topic well, it does give you the initial augmentation of some good ideas when you're thinking it through. But what the email also did was, it also gives some verification and also confirmation of some of the content that was in the report that I was writing. So I think that is one thing that could be beneficial. And then the result of the report, I'm not going to go through the whole thing. Here's a link to it. And then if you want to email me for a copy, there, you can also feel free to reach out as well. So the report was about like, what can we do with data and AI to empower trainers and learners, right? And again, what I have done is I have assembled what is the latest conversation about this in the literature, but also in practice, and we divided up into this like temporal take. So we have the 5 days, where it's more to discover the topic, and then more on the technical, and then the higher level like thinking through, right? How do we think about these issues more critically, but also pragmatically? What I will highlight for now is what ChatGPT offered in terms of learning opportunities in the world of work and to trade unions, but also in the academic sense, is it offers the opportunity to talk about the inherent risks of what these ChatGPT like generative AI can do for learning and for in the context of training as well, which we will get to. And I think that kind of really opens that type of conversation about digital literacy about AI as well. And then thank you very much to Jeremy as well to share his insights. And then when we kind of move along, we begin to kind of think about, how do we empower instructional designers and, some of us are teaching courses to actually be more empowered as users of this, right? And I think that's also quite important. And then we move into the 5 months about how we think through GPT like AI world, is how are we thinking through instructional design in an AI world, and then what does that mean for the type of learning that we want to do? And then so I think what's important here from the report is what are the learning journeys that we want learners to go through when the learning process of acquiring information have changed, right? So this also means like, we're actually learning through like searching for information in a particular way. And I think ChatGPT also changes that. So I think this offers opportunity to think about instructional design as well. And then lastly, in the more kind of critical conversation that I think we need to also have is about social dialogues about, what's the future about quality of learning and work, and then what are the possibilities of ways of artificial intelligence, synthetic knowing, learning, and training going forward. So like these are some of the more kind of policy like discussions that we're trying to think through as well. So that's a link for it. If you want to email me for the report, please feel free. And then for my last part, I will give an example, like Roman also mentioned a bit about this, and then I will finish. So here's a prompt. So a good friend of mine is finishing his PhD, and then he had to do quick abstracts about what he's trying to do. So he actually gave ChatGPT some instructions, and then this is just a part of that. So what it offered was it did give some very good outline on how to write this abstract for a very complicated doctoral dissertation in bioengineering, right? So it has like, oh, first our objective is blah blah blah, and then it goes like our results, then it follows in a logical sequence on how an abstract should look like. And then I will share with you a bit of the back and forth that we had on WhatsApp. So my friend was saying like, oh, it is like shockingly good. I just had to remove some of the parts that would, yeah.
Okay, sorry to interrupt. Can you make sure to sum up, because I want to make sure everyone has time to.
Wait. It is almost done. Oh, wait. It is almost done. Yeah. So we have this. So it's very good at giving summarizations, and then but my friends were also saying like, oh, but it is quite dangerous as well, because like then people might not actually read the work that they have to read. But then like they were also saying, oh, it is also very good at writing equation, even though 1/3 of the material is wrong or misplaced. So we have to be careful, but it is great when you want to explore how to code, right? Or find new ways of actually kind of new ways to find solutions in coding, let's say. And then my friend made a joke about like, oh, honestly, it's funny because, you know, this will make employees to take on more breaks if they wish, right? Because now they're more efficient in doing their work. So these are kind of some examples that I have experienced in the last few months about how ChatGPTs could be used in a practical sense. Okay, that's it.
Thank you, Kai. Merci d'avoir
Thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing the elements of the GPT learning, the transactional learning. We talked about the didactic.
Face à ces outils. Donc je te remercie. Je voudrais juste assurer
pathway. I just want to make sure that everybody has the time to reflect and to present the time is going by fast, so we have to make sure we get enough time so that everybody can express their opinion, their view. And I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful for your presentation. Raja Shatila, can you talk about the first theme, the opportunities, the ChatGPT?
Merci beaucoup pour
Thank you very much. I thank you much for the invitation to speak on this. I'll talk if I can share my screen at this point. Raja Chatila, I was talking about generative artificial intelligence such as ChatGPT. What can it offer to the academic world? I'll talk about the teachers who don't have the time, and talk about the teaching assistants. Again, what opportunities they can really find. And so I kind of cut and paste the question I put in here. And these are the answers I got from research assistants, teaching instructors, TAs. And you can see about the content creation. They say the generative artificial intelligence, they take part from the question I talked about, and the same thing. Here's some of the observations. They can be useful
for personalized learning.
Assistants de recherche
Research assistants said they can make personalized learning again too.
Assistants d'enseignement en disant que
they can help to summarize a large quantity of text. It's an easy way to summarize if you have a lot of reading to do to perform hypotheses based on existing information. You formulate these hypotheses are based on existing information. They also suggest that they can be used useful for personalized learning, again, as we said. And there was it helps give the feedback the way that they're very useful. They adapt the responses to the specific needs of each student. Content creation, they can use to create content for courses, court notices, questions for exams, and case studies. Review and edition, they can be useful for editing academic work, pointing out academic grammatical errors, stylistic errors, and the coherence of the text for review, for text review. Further, they can be also useful to learning new languages. It can provide interactive dialogues and corrections. These 5 different responses, I think, were. And I read this. I said, okay, but is it a little bit superficial? These suggested advantages of ChatGPT. And furthermore, I would have thought that maybe they could give examples, really specific examples of how we could function, not just a general result, and maybe go a little more deeply about actually outcomes, the real specific outcomes. And then I came to the conclusion, he says, it's important that the generative artificial intelligence have great potential. They have their faults. They have their shortcomings as well. They can sometimes be generating information which is not exact, misleading. And therefore, the using artificial intelligence must be carefully monitored by human intervention. The ethical questions, confidential questions, can also create a problem, and when particularly in a university context, if used in an academic setting. Is it contradictory then? Which they said, right, says this contradict when they say, how can I say that the information provided by are relevant, and can they actually help me to distinguish the false from the false? But if they can't really distinguish from the false, then that leads to ethical problems. And so if they give false information, and the question of confidentiality arises. So with that, and so I have many questions. Can these artificial intelligence be? Are they good research tools in the academic setting? If they are used, if we do use them, it requires a lot of discernment. We have to avoid contradictions, that they don't give misleading information. And I wonder. And especially if we're talking about, we still need supervised learning.
Un dialogue où, effectivement, on sait très bien que dans le dialogue, on peut s'enfermer dans des manières d'interagir avec le système.
In particular, we have to know how to interact with the system.
Un grand maître
I remember one of the great masters
du siècle dernier,
of the last century.
Richard Feynman, un grand physicien,
spécialiste
de la physique quantique,
and he did quantum physics. He was very well known. As he was a great teacher, he was great known for his teaching. He was a great academic, and he was a.
Que disait Richard Feynman?
What did Richard Feynman say about this?
Il a dit, the purpose of teaching
is to inspire
the
desire for learning in students,
and make them able to think,
think and ask questions. So in this sense, the uses of thought, the uses of the mind, they said he effectively allowed me, gave me the capacity to question, so ask the relevant questions that what interests him does really exact to effectively.
Être, comme la question le dit,
is the question, because it's beginning. How do I become a good research assistant or a good teacher or teaching function? Thank you very much for listening to me and to my comments.
Merci Raja.
Thank you, Raja,
merci pour avoir,
for your feedback
nous avoir détaillé, analysé la réponse
and your detailed response as well to each response to the first question. You raised an issue, of course, a very important issue.
Sur ce qu'est le vrai travail au final de professeur.
What's the final work that has to be done by academics, by teaching, by academic instructors, research assistants, and in order to be the teaching function, in other words, to respect the purpose of the teaching function at the university level.
De toute façon, il y aura la place, et donc je répète qu'il y aura la place pour
we
tous
will
ceux
have time
qui ont des questions
during question periods if people have questions after the last presentation.
Pour poser vos questions.
Then you will have time to ask questions. I'm going to turn the floor over. Pamela Lirio.
Take the stage.
You can share your screen.
Je suis là. Je vais changer pour l'anglais.
I'm going to be speaking in English for my English colleagues, and it will be a little bit easier.
I have no slides, so I'm just going to sort of talk to you about some reflections I have. I do appreciate, please, being invited. Strangely enough, I was invited to speak at the Canadian Industrial Relations Association, and I wasn't able to make it. And we had proposed to do a Zoom recording of my commentary. So to be able to actually contribute live with an audience, I'm really happy to do that, since they canceled actually our panel. Anyhow, but some of you may know that I teach a course called Digital HR, or RH Numérique. And interestingly, when ChatGPT came out, I was finishing my teaching and haven't taught since. So I didn't have any students maybe using ChatGPT, wasn't available. But I am thinking about it with one of my doctoral students right now, of creating an activity to à la fois teach it and also understand, because it's part of what's happening, and in human resource management, people are using it. One of the remarks I definitely want to make about the first question, I appreciate the provocation, perhaps, that was in that second question of question one. Do they make, generative AI, do they make good research or teaching assistants? And if so, how? I want to reassure those of you who are my current research or teaching assistants or future ones, I'm not going to replace you. I need you. And as my colleague just said, Titala, we need the kind of thinking that you can do. We hope to inspire you to be the next generation of us, okay? And the generative intelligence that you bring is based on a vast amount of sources and dynamic sources, okay? Whether it's us, whether it's your colleagues, whether it's, research that you're doing. Whereas ChatGPT's version, as you may or may not know, is, based on data all the way up to 2021 of September, but nothing forward. I actually tested this, asking it a question about a product called Talent GPT. So if you're in HR, you might be interested in knowing that. And that's by this company called Beamery. And when I asked ChatGPT, it said, I'm sorry, I don't have data on that. It might be a product or tool that was created after. So I appreciated the transparency of ChatGPT, but just to show you where the limits are. But speaking still along opportunities, I do find it interesting for accessing perspectives perhaps that you don't know about. It's interesting with ChatGPT how you put however long your prompt is, it'll keep going. At least in my experience, it keeps going and going until you tell it to stop, which, again, is interesting because it's not giving you the right answer. It's giving you some sort of answer. And then hopefully we put our own human intelligence onto that and customize according to what we need, right? That's the other thing. You must customize, please. I've heard that in everybody's discussion in a way, but not sure if we drove that home, so to speak, for you all. I appreciate some of the efficiency for writing standard things. So for example, something that takes up quite a bit of time for a professor could be writing letters of recommendation, especially when if you're teaching an undergraduate class and you've got a lot of students wanting to go on to masters, you have a large class, you get a lot of requests, right? And then, my French is good, but it's not my native language, and I have to do most of my work in French, so I have to write those in French. And I did a little experiment with ChatGPT, and I have to say it gave me a nice, model in French of a standard letter of recommendation. So I find that interesting, the capacity with the different languages. As someone who also teaches international HR, I appreciate the potential to help a lot of people who are non-English, native English speakers, to be able to perfect their CV, their letters, whatever, their emails maybe in a certain way, trying to use that. Except for, I will have to say, when I wrote that letter, I did try to specify that I was writing for a female student to see if ChatGPT picked up on the gender that I needed in French. It did, but it didn't understand certain conventions, and it put the abbreviation mademoiselle, which normally I wouldn't do. We try to make it generic, more madame, all right? And so it doesn't know everything. Maybe it will miss an agreement, which is very important, les accords, right? With grammar in French, if you are not paying attention to what you're really writing in there. So I guess the last thing I'd say is, okay, as a tool, but there's no way that I'm replacing myself or my teaching or research assistants with generative AI. And I'm specifying that too. I think our colleague, Jeremy, it was nice that you gave that whole introduction, but it's interesting how in the common vernacular, everyone is saying ChatGPT. And, if I'm talking about HR space, I have to say talent GPT for that one product, right? It's GPT maybe generically, it's generative AI generically, it's LLM, right? Those are the tools upon which, but ChatGPT is a brand. And the more that we reinforce talking about that as if that's the issue here, it's like giving preference to, I don't know, to Microsoft over Apple. And some people have very strong feelings over either one, right? And so if I said you're an Apple user, right? People will be like, wait a minute, no, I'm not. So let's just pay attention to that as well. Okay. Mais je passe la parole maintenant. Merci.
Merci beaucoup, Pamela.
Thank you very much, Pamela,
très intéressant.
for your presentation.
Je relève à travers ta réponse à la fois
from your answer, what I
deduct
from your answer,
l'utilisation pour écrire
that
en
can be
langue
useful
étrangère
in a foreign language, using a different language. Of course, that's an advantage, and you get a fairly good response.
J'ai beaucoup aimé aussi
I like the fact that
début de ton intervention sur le
at
fait
the beginning you said
l'impression que maintenant les professeurs doivent redonner confiance
that we have to
aux
establish
réponses
trust.
générées naturellement par les étudiants.
Responses which generated naturally by our students, by our graduate students.
Un futur un peu vertigineux. Il faut redonner
if they think about
en fait,
sometimes I'm not sure of the future. We have to remember that they have a very important
face
contribution.
à la concurrence de l'intelligence artificielle.
And certainly, in particular, is the competition from artificial intelligence, will it be replacing us, the research functions?
On réalise
We
que
realize that
ChatGPT n'est qu'un outil parmi d'autres, des nombreux qui vont sans doute arriver et qui existent déjà
and there'll be other competitors. There will also be generative artificial intelligence.
Nous-mêmes comme argument marketing un peu pour
it's a little bit of a marketing program as well.
Tous les enjeux
but
dont on parle aujourd'hui sont communs à toutes les IA génératives de texte.
And of course, all these different products are trying to look at generative text production and design.
Si tu veux aussi nous partager ton point de vue à propos de cette
you want to share your point of view about this first
Right, so I'll do this one in English just because it's a bilingual meet today. So there were some really good points raised already. I'll keep mine brief. I just want to raise or emphasize a bit more on what Pamela just said, that these are tools, right? And it's really important to remember that these are tools that will help augment us in a sense and not replace us. I do not see this as any kind of replacement for human ingenuity, not in this current form anyway. So maybe what I'll just do now is give an example of how this tool could be particularly useful, especially for the context of today's crowd, which I understand is mostly academics, master's and PhD students. One thing that we have that is very precious to us is time, right? And there's only so much time in a day. There's only so many hours. And especially depending on the fields you're in, it's usually moving at a breakneck pace. I know that in the machine learning world, it's crazy. It's just impossible to keep up with the amounts of publication that are daily at this point on new innovations. So one way in which these tools can really help us actually is to synthesize and gather information. That doesn't mean to reason across these syntheses, but it just means to get this information and synthesize it for us. So for example, this is from a personal anecdote. I found ChatGPT to be particularly useful at taking abstracts that are sometimes obfuscated. If you're not a subject matter expert for that specific field, you might have a really hard time understanding the abstract. And you literally take the abstract, copy paste it into the prompt and say, explain like I'm 5. And it'll do a really good job at synthesizing that abstract. And now you just went from spending a whole afternoon trying to understand what the point of the paper really even is to, oh, here are the main takeaways. Is that actually what was relevant for myself? And you just saved yourself a lot of time. Now, this might go even one step further. You know, you could put it on an RSS feed or whatever of a bunch of different abstracts and say, all right, summarize every new abstract in this field, and maybe soon we might be able to say, if there is something of this kind of topic, report it back to me. And now you have a really advanced kind of filter for your specific topics of interest. Now, obviously, like we've seen, these things are full of flaws. And in question 2, we'll talk about a lot of these flaws. But at least at summarizing, especially with a context that is provided, these tools seem to be really good. So the last thing I'll stress is, I think it's all of our responsibilities when using these tools to really learn the limits of these tools and to kind of harness their full potential at what they're good at, and everything else just to kind of leave to the humans, leave to your intelligence, leave to your common sense, your knowledge and your common sense reasoning that is actually so very precious and very, very hard to emulate. So I'll end it there and let Romain take over for the moderation.
Merci à toi, Jérémy.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. Thank you for your comments as well on this, your final comments. This is important ideas. You said the lack of time, that we're all burdened by the lack of time. Therefore, it's allowed to certainly use our time judiciously to more important things. And we'll come back to this in the second part of the theme. I think it's a way to, perhaps a myth, if we use the book. I think that the form of the chatbot, the ChatGPT, the chat,
à ce mythe-là, selon lequel en fait on pourra avoir une réponse
unique, in the idea that we get a single answer, single response, and once we, there are a certain number of more words that we put in the.
Et donc, ça pose vraiment, je pense, des questions.
I have many questions.
Cette interrogation, et c'est juste en fait.
I still have many interrogations, many inquiries I'd like to.
On y reviendra.
But
en tout cas, merci Jérémy.
Thank you very much, Jeremy.
Let's
open the discussion to the general public, to all those who are in attendance.
Je proposais de réduire un tout petit peu cette première partie de questions-réponses à 10 minutes.
Start with 10 minutes for this Q&A, and at the end we can have a summary for it.
En tout cas de lever à ce moment-ci du webinaire uniquement les questions qui
only deal with questions
cette première thématique
with the first theme we've just dealt with the usage and the opportunity of using this generative artificial intelligence and the limits, the dangers, the risks of using artificial intelligence.
De prendre un premier tour de questions.
Let's go for the first round of questions.
Et puis on va voir comment on partage ça et
avec
nos différents intervenants.
And we can try to give the time to. You can use the chat box itself. You can address your questions, summarize in the chat, in English or in French. If you wish, if you want to share the same perspective, the same idea, or anything unique which you've discovered, or you've encountered, the best way that we can. We're really very, very curious to hear you.
N'hésitez pas. Voilà,
do not hesitate at all.
Si vous voulez lever la main,
so please, if you want to raise your hands.
Alors, je vois qu'Angélique lève la main.
Angélique,
Est-ce que
we
tu
see
veux
a hand
continuer?
raised.
Oui, en fait,
Yes,
Laurence avait préparé une question
Laurence
et
prepared a
il ne
question.
semble pas avoir entendu parler de ça. Donc la question
I don't think he
en
heard
français,
this. He heard us speaking about this.
Considérant que l'usage de
Considering the
logiciels
usage
comme mesure d'appui à la prise de notes et l'évaluation
for
comme
note
mesure
taking
adaptative pour les étudiantes
for
présentant
students,
des défis
note taking
d'apprentissage est de plus en plus fréquent au sein
is
de
more and
nos
more frequent
établissements d'enseignement supérieur.
within the different
Comment
university
un outil
institutions.
comme ChatGPT pourrait-il rendre
ChatGPT,
l'enseignement postsecondaire
how
plus
can they
inclusif?
teach
Et
post-secondary
donc, question, si celle-ci est utilisée dans le
more
cadre
efficient,
d'une mesure adaptative,
and
comment
particularly using
pourrions-nous nous assurer que
adaptive
les
measures
étudiantes qui en bénéficient
into the
développent les
students
connaissances et compétences
have
de
acquire the
où
right knowledge and
est-ce que l'outil
skills
est
if they're
adapté
using
à
this
tout le monde?
function as a note
Merci.
taker. Thank you.
Merci pour cette première question.
Thank you for the
Juste
first
avant,
question.
je vais en prendre peut-être une deuxième ou s'il y en
Perhaps
a
we can take a second question
pour,
if there is a second
pour
question.
condenser la partie question-réponse.
So we can be more efficient in
N'hésitez
this
pas.
Q&A.
Alors, j'ai deux participants qui lèvent la main.
I see two raised hands.
Kai et Frédéric.
Kai
Peut-être
and
laisser parler
Frederick.
Frédéric,
Start
Frédéric
with
Martin
Frederick.
côté d'abord, si tu veux prendre la parole.
Frederick Martin, please go ahead.
Oui, simplement une question, je pense, concrètement, là, la question revient aux opportunités que ça nous offre. Je m'attendais à des suggestions peut-être plus concrètes, peut-être une prise de position des intervenants. Ma question, ça serait de renforcer. Pouvez-vous me donner un exemple concret de
Can you give me
chose
a
et
real
peut-être même une
example
procédure pour l'utiliser?
of a specific
Mettons,
use,
on
for
pourrait se donner comme
instance,
exemple l'utilisation de slides ou la création de slides. Donc, c'est un travail qui est
generating
relativement
a
facile à
slideshow.
vérifier, mais qui peut
It's
être, pour
something that
revenir
could
dans
be
la lignée de
easily
Jérémy,
reviewed.
nous faciliter le travail.
But coming back
C'est
to
un exemple
Jeremy's
concret avec
suggestion,
lequel
that
je peux
could
venir.
make
Est-ce
our
qu'il y a
work
d'autres exemples
easier.
concrets comme ça?
Do you have
Peut-être
other
une
practical
procédure.
examples?
Merci pour ta question.
Thank you very much for the question.
C'est bien noté. Bon, je sais que Kai avait aussi levé la main, mais
No, Kai also had a raised hand.
I will reserve my comment. I was just trying to add to the dynamics, but I'll reserve my comment. Yes.
Parfait. Écoutez, je vais déjà partir avec ces deux premières questions.
All right, let's start
Donc,
with
il y avait
these
une première
questions.
question sur
So the first
le
question
besoin de savoir si cet outil était
was to
adapté
know
à
if
tous
this
les
tool
publics. Je résume
could
rapidement.
be beneficial
Et puis la
for
deuxième question, c'est
individuals
sur
with learning challenges or
un exemple en fait
disabilities.
concret,
And the
pragmatique
second
pour
question would be
utiliser
to have some
l'outil.
pragmatic or
Est-ce
practical
que parmi
use
vous,
cases
il y a
tool.
quelqu'un qui souhaite
Would someone like
prendre ces
to
questions-là?
answer one of the two questions?
I can say some things
Sure.
to address Fred as my student. So I don't know if he wants to hear more from me, the concrete examples I will have to say come from the human resource management perspective. So for example, I hear people talk using ChatGPT for recruiting. So writing out job descriptions and trying to write them in ways that are inclusive or more gender neutral or friendly, because there is research that some job descriptions, the way they're written, turn off women applicants and attract more men. And if you want a diverse workforce, obviously you need many people with different gender identifications. Also, some companies can use it for onboarding. You could set up certain parameters, and that's a bit of like feeding into ChatGPT also, to take some of your information and then match it up with, through their model. So, I mean, that comes up later if we're talking about some, challenges or issues, dangers of ChatGPT, whether you're letting your data go out there. But it can also, a lot of things that HR does is very textually based, surveys that you're doing for your employees, the interviews themselves, you need interview questions. So you can use ChatGPT for that. And if I can, just to address what I think the first question was kind of getting at, I think it was, questioning how are we going to be learning about this, about generative AI in the university, how are we going to be using it, how are professors perhaps helping? I want to say it's tricky because this just came out. And those of you who aren't in academia or aren't on the side of where we are as professors don't understand maybe how long it takes to not just get trained to be able to do this, but in our job to create courses, to improve on courses. It takes a lot of time, okay? So even when you are always updating, it still takes time. So there are, and to be able to adapt to not just pedagogical changes in terms of, ideas, theories of what's good teaching or training, but when you're trying to adapt to a tool, and that's technology, and some people are not very, into technology or technologically adept. So we've got this complex thing hitting academia right now. But then even if you're talking about our profession, that's, even if you're not just talking about our profession, but you're talking about what are we allowed to do, then that's our institutions, and let's just keep it at the university level for now and not, the government saying what we can do or not. And what I've done, just a little bit of research from when I found, I'm at Université de Montréal. I know a lot of colleagues too here are at maybe Université Laval or other institutions. And I was surprised just doing a quick Google that Université Laval has like whole pages of what is generative AI, ChatGPT, how to use it, how are students looking at it now, all of this sort of very transparent, open information available. How are we dealing with it at ULaval, etc. UDM, and I was just checking because I get busy sometimes and I forget all these emails, which one did we get? Our official policy is that we don't sanction it, as far as I understand, unless a professor is using it or allows in their class. So I appreciate that, our profession is respected and I'm allowed to use that, because it would be a real shame if I couldn't talk about ChatGPT in my digital HR class of all things, but in general. But we're not saying it's okay, I guess, for students to use it. So that kind of puts, our pedagogy in a tricky place. Do we adapt it? Do we not? How do we handle with students? And I'm open to hearing what my colleagues, of course, think on the panel and all of you. But when disruptions like technology come in, I'm all for understanding it, trying to figure out what's right, wrong, ethical, usable. And I always feel that if you try to shut things down or prevent people, it's just not the way to go, right? You want to figure out, it's here to stay. So, thanks. Yes.
Thank you, Pamela. Merci beaucoup. Je vois que le temps file vraiment. Et si on
I can see that we're running out of time, and if we'd like to keep time for the second theme, I suggest that we move on immediately. And in any case, perhaps the panelists can cover some elements of the first Q&A within their intervention. So I will hand it over to Angélique Rouffief to facilitate this second part of the panel. I will let Angélique present the second time.
To all of you to be with us this morning. We are in Quebec City with our other member of the committee, with Emily and other PhD students here in University Laval. So the first question I will ask to Jérémy. At the same time, there are significant concerns about the use of ChatGPT in the academic world. What do you see as the main dangers of using generative AI in academic teaching and research? How to avoid them? How can it be framed, regulated? Thank you.
Thanks for the question. Yeah, I'll answer it a bit more broadly, but I think it'll still kind of answer the question because it's been brought up quite a bit already. And I didn't have that much time to spend on it in my introduction to ChatGPT. But one of the biggest dangers in that sense of utilizing ChatGPT is its nature as a mechanical parrot. So it very rarely knows when it's wrong or why it's wrong, and it will very gladly just continue inventing stuff, even though it has no idea what it's talking about. Now, there are certain guardrails that were kind of half baked into these models, and they sometimes work. If you ask it something offensive, it'll say, as an AI language model, I cannot necessarily answer this or that. But these are not moral thoughts that it has. These are just kind of baked in rules in a sense, based on examples of what it was told it should not answer. But otherwise, when you start going into spheres of sciences, let's say, that are more advanced, graduate level studies, not, let's say, entry level university physics, but let's say higher level quantum mechanics, certain things that you might only find 1 or 2 textbooks about at the library, you can ask it a question. And if you are not a domain expert, you will read the answer and say, wow, I'm convinced by that answer. But if you are a domain expert, you might read one sentence, say, interesting, read a second sentence that completely contradicts the first. And by the end of the third sentence, you go, this just makes no sense. And I see this a lot in a kind of different setting. I use it a lot as a coding assistant. And if I ask it to write very generic boilerplate code, it is great. Once I ask it for something more complex, it breaks down in some very obvious ways that to someone who is not a domain expert will have no idea. They will read it and say, oh, that looks great. But then you actually try it and it just doesn't work. Same with scientific ideas, same with citations, references. It'll make up references. And I've tested it. You know, I say, give me references about this and this subject. And it will give me references that look to be good. And one might be real. The second might actually not be necessarily correct. And the third might be completely invented. A lot of you might have probably seen earlier on, it was very eager to print out fake URLs or URLs that never even existed. So that, I think, is one of the real big dangers, is that to a non-domain expert, it can be very convincing in how it answers us. And oftentimes when we go ask these questions, it's because we don't have the answers and we are not domain experts necessarily, but yet we get presented this information as being truthful, the source of truth. This is, you know, the AGI that we've all been waiting for. It knows everything, it knows all. There are very few to no disclaimers on the website that says, actually, this is kind of an experimental tool. We don't really understand how this thing works, and it makes up a lot of stuff when you prompt it. So a lot of my work recently has been trying to augment these tools to actually give citations, to actually base themselves on the information that they have at hand. It's very difficult because by design, these tools were not meant to do so. And so that to me is one of the biggest dangers, is having an over-reliance of trust in these tools and kind of fabricating or rewriting, in the sense, the truths that we already know. And then that will be used to quote, these are now the new truths. So I think experts, especially now more than ever, have a huge role to play in this and verifying these informations and making sure that it is well understood the limits of these tools. So for how to avoid them, it's still an open research question. I'm working on this as we speak, and I mean, there's no obvious way. And then how do you surround it? Comment l'encadrer? Pamela made some really great points. I mean, you see 2 different approaches. One, which is blanket statements, say, you are not allowed to use this tool. Another, which kind of embraces the tool. For me, it reminds me a bit when I was still in high school and Wikipedia just came out. I remember being told, you are not allowed to use Wikipedia. This is not a source of truth. And everyone was so worried that the encyclopedias were going to be destroyed, essentially, and that, you know, this is what we were heading for. We were doomed. A few years later, I think we could all agree that Wikipedia is not perfect by no means, but when you get information from it, you still have some degree of reliability to it, and it cites sources, and you can go follow these sources. And even those sources might not be perfect, and those might be made up, but there is still some certain degree of credibility that you can work with. I think that long term, we will start finding ourselves more and more towards these kind of credible systems. And it might not be ChatGPT. Some new systems might come out, which are more credible than others. And I think it's our role to really critically evaluate these systems. We are all impressed right now. It is really impressive. I don't want to take away from how impressive these tools are, but we also need to take a kind of a critical look at the ecosystem right now and say, okay, well, what would it take to actually say this is a source of truth? Does it only have to cite sources? How well does it have to cite its sources? What are some tests that we can do to make sure that they're good? All the tests that we have right now to measure these intelligences are not adapted. So we kind of need to rethink these things. They're open questions. But yeah, so I won't go on much longer, but to sum up, I think really the biggest danger to me is just this assertion of authority over very complex subject matter, when in fact these things are no more than mechanical patterns, really.
Okay, thank you, Jeremy. Raja said that he will also answer this point, but first I would like to ask the same question to Pamela.
All right. Yes, I'm here. I was just taking notes myself, because so to kind of continue, like with I agree with what Jeremy was saying, and I think it's like we don't know what's in this technology. It's still a black box in a sense, right? And even though we learn how to use it, doesn't mean exactly we understand what's been programmed behind. Okay, even if it's open, right, to a certain extent. The other thing that I would like to underline, it's not just related to generative AI, but in general, the field of AI, it's still very dominated by a hegemonic group, being big tech, being mostly male, and mostly, let's say, white, hetero. Okay, so when you've got that dominating something that is so large and looming in our world, you're getting a perspective skewed towards a very certain group. Okay, and that's no different here. Even if it's saying, oh, we're scraping data from all sorts of different sources. Okay, which sources? We don't know. And then who created that whole system? Well, if you look at a lot of these companies, who's on their board, who runs them, I typically see what we would identify as male faces, okay? And so that, I want to say, is a danger, especially if we keep embracing this kind of technology without questioning it. I would like people to join me in that conversation, please. And then the other thing, just bringing it back to pedagogy, is I've been reading some things, and I shared in the chat this article that just came out in the Chronicle of Higher Education saying how students are using ChatGPT. I don't think that we need to throw out all of the pedagogical tools and planning that we've done. For sure, we don't have to, but we have to be open to adapt. And it's not a bad thing to consider, well, do we really need to have the final paper or something written to be the measure of learning from a course? So I kind of embrace the idea that this might push professors to get more creative with their final project or their assessments in general. Some of you who studied with me, I do that at all levels, undergrad, grad, master's and doctoral. So I'm going to be even rethinking that for the fall for sure. Maybe doing assessments using social media or something that's creative, but also not so textually based that it's a copy, cut and paste type of a product. It's also going to push me, I think, too, to look and see, all right, like the material I'm getting back, is that really what I've taught my students? So when Jeremy was talking about the source domain, the subject matter experts, like I like to believe that I and my TAs will be able to see what is not really coming from my class, but it's just standard, whatever they can find, I guess, through ChatGPT. I'm curious about that. But, I think a lot of this, we still need to keep questioning and understanding and dialoguing about it. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Pamela. So Raja, you can now answer the question.
Thank you very much. So I think that indeed, when you see the formatted output of systems, of generative AI systems, you can say that if we use it as a tool to help learning, to help education, this will reduce the students' imagination, and indeed might make them more formatted, less creative, because they will see a very, very systematic way, which is always the same, to address issues. and also because they will see always the most common answers to the questions, and most common. Why? Because the purpose of the system is to maximize the correlations between the prompt and the model. It's not to answer the question, actually, right? So we have to keep in mind that the system is not doing its best to answer. It's just maximizing this correlation. Hence, as it has been mentioned, sometimes it will hallucinate just because it's a good correlation. So I was wondering, why don't we reverse the perspective, not using those systems to learn or to enable to answer questions or to look for information or reply, but use them to criticize them. Use them as for example, in boxing, as a sparring partner, which means that when you use the system, you have a priori a critical perspective. You want to see why and if it is wrong. And this will lead you to verify. This will lead you to look for sources. This will lead you to rephrase questions differently. And this is, I believe, something that, on the contrary, will lead to increase your imagination, to increase your critical sense. We are always, as educators, thinking that we need to raise critical thinking in students, and we need them to have a structured thinking, a way that they can express their thoughts in a very well formulated manner. Well, if you enter in a dispute with a system such as ChatGPT, it will not have bad feelings, because it doesn't have any feeling. Discussing with other students or with a professor might raise personal issues, but here, no. So using it to criticize it, to enable you to look for the information, to enable you to verify, to enable you to rephrase things differently, I think that would be a better perspective for using such systems. And reversing, again, as I said, the perspective, meaning that, to answer the second question, using the wrongs, the limitation of the system in a positive way. So I'm not saying we shouldn't use them, but I think that we can use them in a way to better build our own ideas. I mean, students, and also I'm speaking about students, but I'm speaking also about teachers, because what I cannot really understand, I cannot well explain. So, and of course, I don't understand everything. So many times I got back to the basics, to the references, to understand something, because I wasn't able to explain it clearly. I get back to the foundations to better understand. And this is indeed what a system like, generative AI systems can help us do at this time. Thank you.
Yeah, Raja, thank you for your input. Sure, it's we really can use it, but we always have to cross-check the references and the sources. So now Kai have prepared for us a short presentation. Kai, we can.
Oh, yeah, no. I think let's just have a conversation, and I think yeah, and I'm mindful of the time as well. But no. The interventions prior from Raja, Pamela, and Jeremy were brilliant. They are reflective of some of the thinkings that I think many of us are trying to understand, but also there are things that we just don't know yet. And I think that's where a lot of the opportunities also lie. When I look at these systems, there's 4 things that I look at, okay, to critically unpack them. First, what is the business model of OpenAI? So they rely on something called tokens. So 1,000 token is about 750 words, and that's about $30 to $60 depending on the model. So we need to be mindful of how these words are also, you know, we're pushing a lot of information that might not be accurate, and then there are copyright issues. There are many issues about consent, about how they get this information, which leads to the second point. I'll share with you this Washington Post article that began to dig into some of the database that was used for ChatGPT-3, right? And then within this article, what they have demonstrated is what is the content. So I think everyone, each of the presenters also share a bit of a, you know, we have to think about where the data is coming from, right? So what this article did was they actually, you know, visualize what it is actually reflecting. So interestingly, the first website is Google Patents. The second one is Wikipedia, and then it also breaks it down into different themes. So what I'm also trying to show is it is not representative of every knowledge system and ways of knowing, right? And I love what Raja just shared about, like, oh, maybe that's where we can begin our conversation, but let's dig into it more. So that's about so first it's about the business model. Second is about the actual database. What is the actual data? Third is what is the actual computing power that it requires. So large language models, they have begun to use, well, they are part of this acceleration in the actual computing power that's required, right? So this is energy intensive, water intensive, in terms of the data center that's required. So there's a lot of other consequences that we haven't talked about. And then lastly, the fourth is, you know, I was playing with ChatGPT 2. So they did not clean up with so ChatGPT, when you play with it a bit more, I was in a workshop 2 weeks ago on it. And then very quickly, it becomes very toxic, very dark, and it is not a friend that you want to talk to. And so within the ChatGPT OpenAI paper, they talked about they use 716 workers through the outsourcing firm Sama in Kenya to kind of clean the language, right? That could potentially be dangerous, like toxic, or just violent material. And I think there's a lot of workers in the majority world who are doing a lot of this type of work, who are embedded in this value chain of making something that looks like, oh, it is giving us a good prompt or a good return, but it's also on the backs of many workers in places like India and Kenya as well. So when we begin to think about these systems, we need to think about business model. What is the actual database? What is the computing power? and also who are the people who are embedded in them. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Kai. So now we'll have 10 minutes question and answer. So if some of you have a question, you can ask them either in French or in English. We have interpretation. Don't be shy.
Mhm. Is it toujours là? Ah, Gregor.
Hi, great. Thank you very much all. This is a very quick question. I'm not sure that I hear the urgency with which this international grouping of the leading AI lights called for a moratorium on generative AI. Am I missing something here? But I hear a lot of opportunity. I don't hear a lot of moratorium.
You want to answer, Pamela, or someone else, Raja?
Raja first.
Yes, I feel I'm compelled to answer because I signed this. First, the letter about the moratorium is, of course, not a letter that, how would I say, will impose a moratorium, because this is impossible. You cannot impose a moratorium on companies who are and research. It's for me a red flag that was raised to say something is wrong, something is going on which is wrong. We should do something about it. And the letter raises a lot of issues, but it says we need this moratorium for what? To develop some mitigation means in 6 months. Where do you believe it's possible to develop mitigation means in 6 months? No, because we've been working on those means since a long time, and we are not achieving as much progress as we would, of course, pretend to be able to do in 6 months. So the purpose is really to raise this red flag, saying with these systems, we are endangering several issues. One of them is truth. One of them is democracy, because democracy is founded on common knowledge, shared ground between people. And when you have systems that generate content which is which mixes the real and the untrue facts, you don't have these common grounds anymore. We are raising issues about the fact that, for example, OpenAI says that they are moving with this towards general AI systems, which in my opinion is very disputable, but still. So can we keep doing this without any stepping back and looking on what is going on in the tech industry and in the academic environment as well about these systems? This is the purpose of this letter. Take it as let's think about what's going on. Before that, there was a lot of enthusiasm from the public, from the press, the media, etc., about those systems. And I think one of the impacts of this letter was to raise the attention towards the issues that are actually problematic. So, and not to say that these systems are not useful, but they have to be framed.
I wonder if I could, thank you so much. I wonder if I could just add a compliment and beyond the thinking about this, and we're not here to do all of this, so I don't want to derail the discussion, but any insights on regulatory mechanisms with regard to this thinking about generative AI are very welcome, because otherwise there seems to be a lot of hand wringing and the usual stuff that we've heard about responsible IR and AI and all the rest, but it's not particularly convincing. And when we talk about principles like intelligibility and transparency, those have clearly gone out the window, unless I'm mistaken.
Allow me to continue just to be very short. For example, just a concrete tool is watermarking of generated output. And there are some people working on this, including OpenAI, by the way. If you have those outputs which are clearly marked as a content that has been generated by such or such system, and of course this marking should be verifiable afterwards, which means you have detection tools which can be used by anyone. Then you have a first approach, which in my opinion is minimal, that will deal with several issues. For example, these issues about people using them for plagiarism or whatever, making things done by the machine rather than by themselves. But more broadly, this distinction between what is produced by the machine and what is not produced by the machine is a first step to actually have this critical view of those outputs. But I will stop here because I see Jeremy wanting to say something, and probably other people.
Yeah, thank you. I'll just raise a brief point, and with a quick disclaimer that I'm by no means a policy expert, so maybe not the best person to answer this point, but kind of my personal view over the last few months is that a lot of this comes down to regulation, and similarly, you're not allowed to just go and build a building in a city just on a whim, right? You could build a shack in your backyard and no one will really say much. But if you start building a large structure that starts having an important place in a society that could topple over, you need to start following certain rules and regulations. And we've been really good at putting those in place for the same reason that airplanes don't tend to fall out of the sky. Cars can't be rolling if they aren't equipped with all sorts of security features. And you have these companies that need to be behind it, signing off, saying, we take responsibility for whatever might happen when people use our products. I think we need to see more and more of that. I have no idea how you can enforce that on a global scale, but I think governments are already starting to see this need to react. I know, for example, not necessarily always in the best of ways, but I think that Italy recently has just entirely banned the use of ChatGPT in their country for reasons. I don't know exactly the reasons behind that, but that's where you could start seeing governments stepping in and saying, well, if you want to operate using these kinds of technologies at such a scale, you must show assurances that you are doing the steps that need to be done given such and such regulations. Now, I think the regulations will take time, and also, they need to be done while consulting with experts to make sure that they're realistic and not, in a sense, kind of turning these products into what we don't want to see, like cookies all over the internet and banners that say, I agree, I accept. But we still need to have some form of intervention at some point as these models keep getting larger and larger and their societal impacts will be felt.
Thank you, Jeremy. Just for Kai, if you can just make it like 2 minutes maximum, and then I will pass the floor back to Roman to do the conclusion, because we have just 5 minutes left. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll be quick. Part of generative AI that we haven't talked about is also weight theft. So there is a lot of work by writers, by journalists, by artists. Their material are on Instagram, are posted online that has been taken from without consent, right? So there's major copyright issues that the Italian government was trying to tackle, which is the same for artists and writer and content producers in Quebec and across the country as well. So that's something that's like, oh, we're actually taking away wages from workers, right? What I'll share with you, it's an open letter to the Minister of ISAD, the industry. Sorry, it's that it's an open letter that it is still available to be signed. That Blair Adler Frost have put together, and then I've been working with her a bit on the regulatory front to push some of these issues. So what I shared with you actually was this bill that is before the Canadian Parliament that is quite problematic, and then it's not complete. Here, I'll share with you the second. Here we go. In the Google Docs is the open letter addressing some of these concerns by artists about they're not being compensated for their work being used to train these models. So that's a very precise work issue that I think we need to be quite serious about. And I think trade unions also need to be on board on this. I'm working with Blair and others on more regulatory issues. If you want to talk about this more, we can happy to chat afterwards. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thank you so much, Kai. And now I let Roman speak again.
Thank you. Oui, on est désolé de devoir terminer.
We're sorry that we have to cut it off at this point. But at this point, I think we've heard from a lot of people. It was very impressive. I'm glad to continue. But let me thank everybody, all the speakers, for the quality of their comments, of their reflections, and sharing your thoughts and sharing your ideas. There's so many things, there's so many relevant points that have been raised. Let me thank you once again. Warm thanks. Let me thank our interpreters who've been able to help us to provide in both languages. Thank you for the attendees who've raised questions.
L'enregistrement de ce webinaire devrait pouvoir se
retrouver
rapidement sur la chaîne YouTube du CRIMT.
It will be in the CRIMT YouTube session. And please,
le site internet du CRIMT
you can go to the CRIMT internet site to be able to find of upcoming events as well too.
Je vais conclure
Let me conclude. Let me thank one and all for all your contributions. Thank you. Thank you as well.
UDM, HEC, CRIMT,
the CRIMT and the University of Montreal, all our three sponsoring institutions, and to colleagues as well. Thank you.
Merci.